Right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to seminar. It's really good to see you all back here in this room after our wonderful celebration last week. We are really excited to have a last-minute guest speaker who's a student at the UW presenting part of her dissertation work today. I don't think I have any other announcements, so I will hand it over to Rowan to introduce our speaker. Okay, yeah, give it up. Whoever started the class, I'm into it. Thank you. It is my absolute pleasure to introduce Ida Pomeshikov today. Ida is a PhD candidate in the interdisciplinary PhD program in Near East Studies at the University of Washington, and she holds an MA in transcultural studies from Heidelberg University in Germany. Her research focuses on forced migration, refugee and diaspora studies, and comparative humanitarianism, gender and sexuality in Muslim contexts. And her dissertation is titled "The Prophet Was a Refugee Too: Syrian Refugee Women's Search for Belonging in Turkey." And it's based on 2 years of ethnographic fieldwork, which was conducted between 2019 and 2021, supported by the U.S. Institute of Peace Fellowship. And so we're going to hear more about that. So please join me in welcoming Ida. Take it away.
Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for being here today. I know I'm a backup presenter and I'm a junior scholar, so you're here to listen to something very raw, and the weather is amazing outside. So all I'm trying to say is I really appreciate you being here for me. And before I begin, I really want to take a moment to thank Dr. Sarah Karan for inviting me in the first place, and then Rawan for being an amazing mentor, very generous and like so inspiring throughout the whole process. And also I want to say thanks to Arya Azura, because she really encouraged me to do this presentation today when I didn't feel very ready to do it. So yeah, I'm really honored to be sharing this work with you. I will try to speak as much as possible, but I've written the whole thing and I think like I will be reading a majority of it. Apologies about that. I practice, but every time I try to go with the flow, I just diverge too much from my main topic. So like it's, as Rawan mentioned, this research is drawn from 2 years of ethnographic research, but more importantly, it's drawn from everyday life of my interlocutors who are refugees and host women in Gaziantep, Turkey. Their shared kitchens, rooftop conversations, and the rhythms of cooking and care really makes a huge difference in the displacement scene, I believe. And I'm a little nervous because I also want to do justice to their kindness, to their courage, and all their emotional and domestic labor. And as you can probably already guess, this presentation is primarily about migration, is not primarily about the migration policies or numbers. It is about that relationships that form across differences, sometimes quietly, sometimes imperfectly, and how belonging is built not solely by laws, but by tradition. So as Ravan mentioned, I'm an ethnographer and a migration scholar, and my interest in migration studies started from a personal place as well. It began when I was a master's student in Germany, actually. So just a little anecdote to explain where I'm coming from. Before leaving Istanbul, Turkey for my master's studies in Heidelberg, Germany, I had this, the media, I was consuming this with media rhetoric about the Middle Eastern migrants, but particularly Turkish and Kurdish migrants in Germany who weren't able to integrate. And this was mostly like connected to their, I don't know, maybe lack of language skills, maybe lack of other skills, being working class and not having formal education. And I naively thought that I'm getting my BA from a good university, I have language skills. I had this, I describe myself as a global citizen, so I didn't expect to have a migrant experience when I was there for my master's studies. But the whole migration thing is very humbling, I think. So within a month, I realized that it's not about how I present myself, like how much I want to integrate, how much I want to speak the local language, and build friendship, but it is also about the host community's perception of you, their willingness to open their doors to you, and their willingness to understand the difference and like allow some, be generous and understand where you're coming from in cases of misunderstanding. So back in 2013-14, when I was doing my master's, I was watching the news where Syrian nationals were leaving in masses Syria because of the dire circumstances. And majority of them seek refuge in Turkey. And it made me really curious because I could guess that Turkey probably isn't the first choice or isn't the best choice for Syrian refugees. It doesn't have the necessary infrastructure, doesn't have the necessary welfare regime, but it made, through broader political circumstances, it became a feasible option for many people. So many Syrian families were settling there, and as I conducted my MA ethnography, it became very obvious that people were there to stay, that they didn't want to resettle for several reasons, like either to be close to their families in Syria, to their extended family or grandparents, and their parents, or they wanted to raise their children in a familiar cultural context. Or they simply just run out of energy after this destruction of war and being displaced within Syria, and then maybe being displaced in several different cities in Turkey. They just have left with no energy to, like seek refuge and resettlement somewhere else, even if it's like a global northern context where they can have access to better welfare regime. So every interlocutor I'm referring to today are there to, like, they have no intention to leave Turkey in the near future. The chapter I'm sharing with you today is titled Culinary Bonds, How Everyday Food Practices Foster Belonging Among Refugee and Host Women. It explores how something as mundane as cooking can become a powerful platform, one where refugee and host women build rapport and cooperation. And it can foster forms of solidarity that transcend legal status, that transcend ethnicity and language barriers. At the same time, I don't want to romanticize these culinary bonds, although I will do a little bit, but then I won't. In this talk, I also want to underscore like how food can be a marker of exclusion as well, and it can reproduce populist anti-immigrant rhetoric. And I think that what makes these women I'm talking about today so extraordinary is they carve a space of belonging in the middle of a world in which us versus them rhetoric is very prevalent. So I'm interested not only in the questions that emerge in the literature on belonging, but also in the questions that shape people's lives and their decision-making practices. I see my work as speaking to demographers like you, who are interested in migration, settlement, well-being, and families. And maybe when I wrap up this presentation, you can tell me who else I might be speaking to. Just a second. Yes. So I will just like contextualize it a little bit. Why am I talking about Turkey in front of you, and why specifically this city Gaziantep that I refer in my title? So first, this is a map I wrote from UNHCR Turkey's website yesterday. According to the UN data, Turkey currently hosts the second largest refugee population in the world. As of late 2024, you can see on the right corner, the number of Syrian refugees in the country is a little above 3 million people. And this map shows Syrian and some Afghan refugees distribution by province. And two cities are clearly standing out there. If you can see the red ones, the one on the top is Istanbul, and the one on the bottom, the reddest red, is Gaziantep, where I conducted my fieldwork. So during this fieldwork, while I was doing the fieldwork, Gaziantep alone was home to around 500,000 Syrian refugees, and the total population of the city is 2 million. So it's 1/4 of the local population consists of refugees. So if we want to understand refugee host dynamics in everyday life, not just at the national, international, or policy level. Turkey is a vital case, I believe. And Gaziantep in particular, it offers a rich context for exploring how these relationships take on the ground.
Does it, those online, did that help?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Great.
I actually got the crossing word and all this.
Sorry to be honest.
So what makes this region particularly compelling is that Gaziantep and northern Syria share a deep cultural culinary geography. Historically, this is a connected region. In the 19th century, Aleppo was the administrative, Aleppo is the city in the northern Syria. It was the administrative and cultural hub of the Aleppo state under the Ottoman Empire, while Aintab, the historic name of Gaziantep, was a smaller provincial city under its authority. And Gaziantep's cuisine traveled those Ottoman routes and carries many influences from Aleppo's very rich culinary tradition. This shared food culture isn't just historical background, it is a living part of my research as women cook together and they explore together this shared culinary geography, and I'm learning from them. And in Gaziantep, just explaining where the whole data is coming from, I partnered with a local faith-based grassroots humanitarian organization and conducted in-depth interviews with two groups of women through their women's branches, Turkish volunteers and Syrian refugees. I spent many hours in kitchens, markets, charity meetings, charity sales, and I interviewed these 20 women in depth. I collected their life history. And in addition to that, to widen my lens, I carried out like 45 semi-structured interviews with aid workers, like refugee lawyers, activists, and other humanitarian professionals in the field. So since the early days of the war, the Turkish state has called Syrians guests, brothers, neighbors. They often try to invoke this religious imagery, religious sensitivity, linking like Syrian displacement to the Prophet Muhammad's migration from Mecca to Medina. But despite this symbolic embrace, first, the state kind of failed to provide a legal path to permanent residency or citizenship. The path to citizenship remained vague and inconsistent, like over a decade. Now it's 2024, and it's not clear how refugees can apply for citizenship. It's mostly, as far as I heard from not so transparent sources, that.
I'm going to interrupt you. I'm so sorry. So we're having audio situations, so we're going to turn this mic off, and we're just going to ask you to speak really loudly in the room, and then the people online can hear.
Don't need to turn that.
That's fine.
Okay. Yeah.
So stand in front of the and talk loud.
Testing. Can the people online hear us? It's okay. This is part of the.
Yeah, this is part of the
Yes.
experiment.
Okay. Great.
Okay.
Let's keep
I'll
going.
try to be loud as possible. So what I was saying, that first, state failed to provide this pathway to citizenship, and second, this Muslim Brotherhood thing doesn't necessarily speak to the majority of the Turkish citizens, actually. Like, a lot of people are suspicious of the government's use of religion and Muslimhood when it comes to making these decisions about borders. So into this gray zone, I think comes the faith-based humanitarian organizations, especially in Gaziantep city. They and their women's branches. So these organizations use the religiously grounded language of care. They highlighted these practices like ikram, that means to treat someone with honor, usually by offering some food, and sadaqah, which can be translated as almsgiving, and sawab, it is the divine reward Muslims believe to gain through serving God's beloved creatures, basically. So this religious moral vocabulary resonated with both Syrian and Turkish people who meet through these charity events of the grassroots organizations. The moral language definitely softens that cold institutional language of the beneficiary, of the giving aid or like service receiving. It is making aid feel more like relational. It makes feel more intimate. So I'm saying overall in my dissertation, religion does matter, of course. It helped build a baseline of empathy and trust among these groups who identify as Muslims in the first place. So it gave Muslim refugees a familiar moral framework through which to negotiate their needs, to navigate their new social terrain. But I'm saying also that religion alone isn't enough. It provided the entry point, not the whole pathway to belonging. So in this chapter in the culinary bonds, I argue that the real everyday work of solidarity actually happens in kitchens among the women. That's where these moral commitments, the religious moral commitments basically are not only performed, but also reimagined, how they are negotiated and reshaped. So the kitchen becomes the stage where faith-based ideals, cultural memories, and lived experiences of migration come together. Okay, so I want you to imagine a very, very hot August day in an Eastern Mediterranean city. As you can see, those restaurants, basically Gaziantep streets are dressed in color in August. And these are not papers or flags or paper decorations or flags. They are like green and red peppers, deep purple eggplant and bright tomatoes. They are under the sun for drying. They are basically hung there by women, prepared and hung there by women, and they're everywhere. They're drying in the balconies, in window sills, rooftops, laundry lines, and everywhere you go in the city. I have another, just a cute video. This was my view from my living room, and this was just one of the buildings. All other buildings that I could see from the top floor of the building, the studio apartment, I could see these things. And I didn't even see when they were hung. I just woke up and noticed, wow, the city is full of them today. So now I want you to picture what's happening under the shade of like this public picnic table or those balconies and rooftops I mentioned that I spent time in. So Syrian Arab and Syrian Turkmen refugee women alongside with Kurdish and Turkish host women, they're heading together to the neighborhood bazaar. They are bargaining with the sellers there for sacks of vegetables to buy in bulk, hauling them back home. They're washing them, removing seeds, threading them on strings, and hanging them on to dry in the heat. This is all for preparation for winter. But they're also gathering to make other labor-intensive dishes, like pickling vegetables for winter, boiling down fruits for jams, boiling down bones and other parts of animals that I don't understand to make stock, heating gallons of milk in massive cauldrons to make their own cheese, to make their own yogurt, to make their own butter. And these are all common everyday tasks of women, as those bone broths are the base for many, many local dishes. And making the yogurt at home from scratch is considered both healthier, but it is also the most cost-effective option for families who have to survive on a tight budget. So while they do all this labor, women share jokes in multiple languages. They swap family recipes and sometimes get into these passionate debates about which spice works best with which dish. And these scenes actually happen every day in like refugee dance neighborhoods of Gaziantep, but they often go unnoticed because all of this labor is taken for granted, basically. It's part of what is expected from women, Syrian and Turkish alike. So nobody gives a second thought when they see Turkish and Syrian women cooking something together or preparing something together in their building or in their neighborhood. But they raise a simple, powerful question for me as a researcher. So I'm asking, what do shared kitchens offer to refugees who have been pushed from their homes and only partially welcomed in a new city? And as I spent time watching, listening, and participating, what I found is that cooking and eating together, the shopping, prepping, serving, it provides a concrete way for refugee and host women to build a sense of connection. So these everyday culinary practices offer a form of belonging that doesn't rely on that formal integration programs or aids coming from humanitarian organizations. They matter especially because naturalization process for refugees remain uncertain, and because prejudice and exclusion towards refugees have been on the rise in Turkey. So I'm not saying that belonging is a substitute for rights or justice, but it's absolutely not. But I'm just saying that belonging complements them. And while the lack of is there, and these women don't go to protests for rights-based activism, but on the side, they do this kind of domestic labor that I think we should pay more attention to. Okay. Am I going ahead? I'm not sure. So I think I'm going a little too fast. So I'm answering my own question. To answer my own question, what do culinary practices do for belonging? I'll just like very quickly summarize like how sociologists I'm reading theorizing belonging in this context. So I draw on a relational view of belonging. Sociologists remind us that belonging is not a fixed badge or a legal label. It is something people actively build together day by day. Vanessa May writes that belonging connects the person to the social and is actively lived. So it's not just about the legal status or an abstract identity marker, like we are all humans or we are all Muslims. Belonging takes shape through everyday practices. So the achievement of belonging is relational, and in May's words, it reflects how the self and the social are mutually shaping. And this becomes clear when we look at refugee experiences on the ground. Some Syrian refugees have acquired Turkish citizenship in the recent years, yet many locals still perceive them as refugees. Or in contrast, many of my interlocutors, they don't have citizenship, but in their local circles, they are the locals now. When I'm there, I am treated as the stranger. They are hosting me, refugees and hosts alike. So it's the everyday civic engagement between hosts and refugees that actually produce and affirms a sense of belonging. And this framework informs my analysis into interlocking. I'm so sorry. So I'm looking at these two interlocking culinary practices that rely on collectivity, reciprocity, and mutual effort. One I will show some examples of is the collaborative preparation of traditional dishes, as it was in the preparing the paprikas and the peppers, tomatoes, and eggplants. And the second is the ritualized exchange of food, that eating together is ritualized and having part in it is a marker of belonging. So I will begin with the collective preparation part. So many Gaziantep and Aleppo dishes, whether with baklava, probably everybody knows, I don't try to translate this, slow cooked stews or fermented paste, they require time, labor, and multiple hands, and they're traditionally made collectively. So everything is done from scratch. Everything must be peeled, stuffed, dried, preserved, and often in large batches and within a very short seasonal window. Women regularly form these production lines. One steers the cauldron, another peels roasted peppers, a third pans the wood fire oven, and this labor is demanding, but it is also sociable. As they work, they share stories, they share jokes, their frustrations, and they share practical knowledge about where to enroll their kids and which hospital is the best to seek a certain type of treatment. And these moments offer space to discover both like commonalities and differences. For instance, like after finishing a task quickly with her Syrian neighbor, once a Turkish neighbor, volunteer, laughed and said, "Bir elin nesi var, iki elin sesi var." It's a Turkish proverb meaning one hand makes no sound, but two hands make a clap. And her Syrian neighbor like quickly responded with the Syrian Arabic equivalent of this proverb, so these small exchanges, they reveal this shared cultural value around mutual support and collective effort. And culinary labor in these contexts is more powerful than any icebreaker activity that you might find in a formal like integration program or in these kitchens, like women are not being taught the integration, how to integrate, but they are actually living it, they are making it. So here's another example. Now is the time for my video. So this is a building where 3 families are living together. They are living in the same apartment. One Kurdish Turkish family and 2 Syrian families. And they gather on the rooftop every 2 weeks to bake lavash bread. So they mix the dough together and cook it over a coal-fired iron griddle. I think the main thing is the iron griddle that is very messy to make. It's not easy. So basically, in each session, they bake like 40 to 60 flatbreads per family. And then when they run out of it, they gather again to make more. And these sessions are not just practical, but they're joyful moments of connection for the women and their small children and elderly people who get to sit together and play together while women are working together. This is another video from the same group of women that I filmed. I only film hands, by the way, because these are private places. Women are not in their proper religious attire, so I'm only allowed to make a photo. It's actually very crowded, but I cannot show you guys in these videos, unfortunately. So this is the same group of women. They often come together and prepare different versions of this wheat-based vegetarian dish. And they experiment with one another's recipes. There's different spice blends, different local greens, and over time, actually among us, making this dish and eating it together became kind of a ritual. Because during my first visit, we gathered at the Turkish Kurdish family's home, and they, by coincidence, made their version of that dish that day for me. And one of the Syrian families, they were like, next time we have to gather in our apartment and I'm gonna make the version I know of, and it's like better than this. So next time we gathered there and I ate her version. And then the other neighbor was like, it tastes so much better with fried mint on top. So next time we have to eat this version together. And over like 3-4 months, I think we ate several different versions of this, including neighbors came in and they made their own versions. But this exactly brings me to my second point about the culinary bonds, that is the ritual of eating together, basically. So in Gaziantep and in Aleppo as well, again, if something smells good, you are expected to offer it to your neighbor, to people around you in your community. And refusing food is immediately noticed. Offering food to a neighbor or like trying a stranger's dish is basically saying, it's a way of saying, I'm open to knowing you. And in this context, praise for good cooking, getting praise for your generosity, it becomes like one of the quickest paths to gain respect, establish yourself, and build a community. This practice is reinforced by shared religious and cultural customs. Just to name the few, during holidays like the Feast of the Sacrifice, Ramadan, or Ashura Day, that is a day of religious remembrance, or like when women are making halwa, a type of sweet dessert to honor someone who has passed away in their family. Women are expected to prepare specific dishes and share them. Another common practice is making and distributing pastries like after a vow that has been fulfilled, to show like your appreciation. And these dishes are not just shared, they must be consumed together. And this is perceived as a form of community building. And it is showing basically to your community that you are there to support each other. And even outside of these special occasions, it is very common for these women to come together, like gather for a mid-morning coffee, for example. And each of these gatherings, they might be large, like for a celebration, like a festival celebration or like a mini coffee gathering, they slowly draw women into these shared social circles. And over time, this food ritual, they become a kind of a social glue. Anthropologist Dolly Kekan, she reminds us that taste can create a solidarity that cuts across ethnic markers, and food builds new kinds of community. And in Gaziantep, cooking helps refugees maintain that link to their home from their personal narrative. They find a daily purpose, and they influence like how host people see them as respected, hardworking, and generous women. And for host communities who are open to sharing and eating together with refugees, it is a way to offer care and empathy, basically. And these exchanges, they often evoke this historical memory of like Turkey and Syria once sharing sharing the same borders. So women frequently say 100 years ago there was no Turkey or Syria, only like it was the Aleppo province. So here the imaginary of a shared cuisine becomes this alternative map of belonging, and rooted not in the modern nation state, but in this shared sensory and historical past. So I'm not saying that kitchens are utopias. This is where I stop romanticizing and giving you a little bit of the other side of the coin. There are also actually very frequently moments of exclusion and rejection. Syrian made foods are sometimes dismissed as dirty, or market stalls labeled as unhygienic, and usually these kind of narratives are echoing racialized stereotypes about Arabs in Turkey. Some Turkish shoppers told me that they avoid Syrian shops for fear of contamination, or on one occasion, like one taxi driver warned me against eating at a restaurant, saying that, oh, we know that the owners are actually Syrians. So there are many cases, like it is important to acknowledge that refugees are frequently excluded from those food sharing rituals, or like their offerings are rejected. Another example from the field again, one Syrian student, she told me like how when she was new to her language class, once baked a kind of specialty cookie for her classmates, thinking that that's gonna help her to warm up and like build some connections in the classroom. And when she brought it, no one wanted to taste it. They all looked suspicious and they didn't take even one. And she described that moment like how her heart was dropped, and she understood that like it was not a rejection of the cookie itself, but it was kind of a rejection of herself being in that classroom with them. And now she says that she's using food to test the grounds. Basically, she's offering food and to see the reaction of the local. And if they accept it, she sees, okay, there's a potential for me here to build some sort of relationship. And if she's rejected, she takes it as, okay, this is a boundary drawn between me and this person now. And other refugee women recall similar experiences, especially when they first came to Gaziantep, like how they were trying to make friends by bringing plates for their neighbors, and neighbor women either not opening the doors fully or like rejecting the food, not even taking the plate. And these refusals, they're all that invisible but powerful like boundaries between the locals and refugees, and almost everyone I met, they have a memory like this. So in this context, food becomes both a welcome mat, as I'm trying to say, but it's also a warning sign. And the same student who baked the cookies for her classmates, she later told me that she agreed to be my interlocutor because during our second meeting or something, we were in her house and she offered me, I made this dinner, do you wanna eat together? And I was like enthusiastic, I wanted to eat. So she was like, I like you because you like my food. Like I immediately know that I could be your interlocutor. That's one thing that helped me in my appetite helped me. I want to talk a little bit about shifting roles and narratives in shared kitchens as well. In cases where host and refugee women share these kitchens for cooperation and meals in solidarity, we also see these shifts in power dynamics, that can empower refugee women in subtle but meaningful ways. So when a refugee woman hosts a group of local women in their home, she becomes the host. Like in that moment, she occupies a social position where the guests are expected to show respect. They are expected to show respect for her home, her cooking, and her voice, her opinion as well. And I have an example for this too. During a mid-morning coffee gathering, again, where I was also invited, a Syrian woman I was visiting, she had prepared a tray of pastry for her Turkish guests. And the biscuits she made, it had this very rich flavor of mahleb. It's a spice that's not very commonly used in pastries in Turkey. And so they questioned, like, they asked about the recipe. And she said that, oh, it is from my Armenian great grandmother. And she was like casually, you know, she was originally from a city middle north from here, but she was displaced to Deir ez-Zor in Syria during the Armenian genocide. And this created a quiet moment among women, because for the local woman, genocide, it wasn't the version of history they were raised with or they were told by the official historic narratives. But they also couldn't challenge or, I don't know, say something slightly suspicious because they were in her home and they were her guests. And in that context, they were obliged to show respect and confirm her narrative of what happened to Armenian population in Turkey. And I think like what followed was kind of a thoughtful, gentle exchange where like these, I think like people really reconsidered what they know and how they know versus these oral histories coming from lived experiences of people. And that recipe is there to reconsider like what do they know about borders, what do they know about memory and previous displacements in this geography. I think I will show, I have a little bit of time. Yeah. So my data comes from this private everyday spaces, and it's actually mostly because I conducted this fieldwork during the pandemic and homes were the main places where we were meeting. Even the charity sales, it was in the beginning of my fieldwork that I was able to attend a few, but later on there wasn't such option. But as I'm following the news, as I'm following the projects done by especially Syrian local organizations or like the grassroots organizations. Now I see more and more of these official initiatives where shared kitchens become a humanitarian project. So women I work with, they were connected to a local aid organization, but the culinary practices I describe here, the photos, they weren't part of a program or like they didn't receive funds for this. This was just purely for themselves, for their families and for their community. I now see that the trust and relationship built in these private kitchens eventually laid the foundation for more formal initiatives. And here, these two are from Gaziantep. The one on the right, basically mutfak and matbah is the kitchen in Arabic and Turkish. And one of the volunteers there in their project description says, kitchen is a social space where strangers become neighbors and neighbors become kin. I think it is very similar to my findings in those private spaces. And I also see that refugee initiative called Sada Women's Cooperative, which started as a kind of a solidarity project, and I think now turning into a more not for profit, but to sustain the project. They are now selling what they are doing. And similarly, sorry, I'm going down. Not in Gaziantep, but in other cities. This one, the Women's Solidarity Kitchen in Istanbul, it now is very visible. It gained some visibility. As you can see in the photo, in the bottom it says some of the gems and preserves made by the Women's Solidarity Kitchen in Istanbul on display in their commercial kitchen. And then I saw this very recently. It is in a smaller city, but it is also like refugee dance, as it's near Istanbul, commutable, but cheaper to live in. There's this refugee-led Al Shami kitchen project where Syrian refugee women would come together and cook together and then sell it for some sort of profit. So these initiatives, they all began as grassroots, self-funded efforts. And over time, as their stories circulated through humanitarian networks, they attracted local shoppers and international donors. And with institutionalization came funding, it came more visibility and recognition for women's labor and care work. But as many participants emphasized, the real kitchen came first. So which I think underscores that importance of like how institutional success is impossible without that relational foundation. And I think that's a big takeaway for practitioners. It's a big takeaway for funders and scholars too. So in other words, I'm trying to say that these formal projects were built on that relational capital, that trust, that reciprocity, and that shared effort that had been cultivated very carefully through years among women. think I'll just present my final. I only have 4 minutes. Perfect. So in conclusion, I tried to show that belonging is not something fixed or something granted, or it's something just about the effect. It is something people build together through shared actions and everyday relationships. And in Gaziantep, I've shown how refugee and host women transform kitchens and rooftops into spaces of mutual care, where that line between the guest and host is blurred through the simple, powerful acts of cooking together and eating together. And I want to remind one more time that the legal rights are a must, but visa status and citizenship alone does not guarantee belonging. We need to recognize that. And I think we see that today in US context too, how legal status of migrants are being questioned based on assumptions that they don't belong, and many people are actually accepting it. I think it makes it important to understand like how belonging is actually a civic society work as much as, and can't be necessarily determined by state or humanitarian organizations. So yeah, refugees may hold legal documents yet still be treated as outsiders, and conversely, through those without legal status may be fully embraced by their local communities. And when we talk about the future of forced migration, I think we must move beyond the frameworks of borders and security. And knowledge produced by states, they often reduce refugees to risk categories, and humanitarian narratives, they can strip people of agency by casting them as passive victims. But studying belonging is a bit different because it asks refugees and migrants themselves where they want to live, how they want to live, like how they want to connect and under what conditions. And it is rooted in those relationships, and it grows through daily acts of trust and reciprocity. So if we start listening to the claims of belonging made by refugees themselves, we begin to shift that conversation. We begin to shift that conversation from managing populations to making space for shared futures. And so finally, belonging is slow and it's a quiet form of social change. I definitely understand that, but it's one we can build plate by plate and story by story. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you. If you have any questions, I think we have 15 minutes or feedback. I'm still writing this, so it's a work in progress. Please, Sarah.
Thank you. That was really lovely, and I do think it connects with how connects with demography. So one of the areas in which I was thinking about your project is around immigrant incorporation, some of the language and sociology around immigrant incorporation. And I wondered if you could say a bit more about this community and how people came to live relatively close to each other. Mm-hmm. Because of course there are other ways in which the state might structure refugees around isolating them and putting them into camps, or keeping them in one part of a place and segregating from others. Mm-hmm. And I wondered how that was structured in this case.
Mm-hmm. I should repeat the question, right? So the question is how refugees and these locals are basically finding each other. What is like the demographic background that?
You don't have to say demographic. Just how are they so closely?
How they are closely tied in this context. So thanks so much for this. I should have specified in the very beginning. Actually, none of the refugees in Turkey right now living in the camps. Initially in 2011, there was a bit of an attempt to build camps along the border, but as the so-called crisis was so pressuring and numbers were big, they ditched the camp setting immediately, and refugees are settled locally with their own resources, and if they qualify for some requirements, they could also get some help from state, like cash aid from state. And how they came together is in Gaziantep, it is impossible not to have a Syrian or Iraqi neighbor in your building, in your neighborhood. But I think particularly in old city neighborhoods, not the new ones around the university or outskirts of the city, but in that central old place, rents are much more affordable. And I'm not sure. Living there, I guess, is a bit easier for refugees. That's how they are just there together because numbers are so high. But how my interlocutors were connected is local women are volunteering for this grassroots organization, and the refugee women are connected to that organization because somehow they help them to maybe like find a job, find accommodation, or they were doing some family picnic or charity sale, and they were invited to attend. And during those gatherings, they get to know each other. And some of the refugees, they didn't even directly visit the organization. It's just the volunteer is attending the organization, and they have a bit of a understanding that they should be more welcoming towards refugees, and they themselves visit the neighborhood refugees and bringing food and trying to include them. And those are not like counted as numbers in the organization, but women themselves do this as an act of service to community. Thanks so much. Arya, please.
Thank you so much for this. The question I have is about the role of recruitment. I know your interviews was specific, but then we see these images of dry and public spaces. So I was wondering, just from your ethnographic experience, if there are certain spaces in your region where integration expand and interact.
So Arya is asking about how outside of private spaces, these culinary practices are taking space, taking shape. And this, I think there the grassroots organizations play a larger role, and they organize these barbecue picnics for families. They organize these charity sales, but the charity sale is not just to collect money for an organization, for a goal, like to send some funds to Yemen or something, but it's also for exactly to introduce these families to each other. So they intentionally organize these family-friendly gatherings where food is either prepared together or everyone bakes something and bring to the event. But as I said, unfortunately, it was the pandemic time, and I only observed a limited amount of those events in public. I should probably do some follow-up research if I want to expand on this.
Yeah, thank you. This is so fascinating. I think that some of the insights you got on this are so, it's just really wonderful. And I was wondering how the Turkish women involved are initially getting involved in these organizations, or like what's drawing them, do you get from your perspective, to these organizations?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So the question is how Turkish volunteers were initially engaged with this grassroots organization, because I think many through their husbands actually, as the organization, it's a Gaziantep-based organization, and it's the managers are very, I don't know how to describe, but they are approaching merchants and families in the city to collect donations, and they also offer these reading circles for women or like sewing classes for women. So they also encourage people to spread the word among women. But most of my interlocutors, they were involved either through their father, their brother, or their husbands. Like they heard this organization exists, and they found it like it's a safe space for them to, like build other connections. But they also, they offer these trainings in religious ethics, and they also find that kind of training valuable. And that's where they initially, I think, gathered and came up with this understanding that they should help the refugees in their city, in their community. Yaman, please.
Thank you for your presentation. The first time you presented, one of the takeaways that surprised me was
this switching of roles when essentially the Turkish residents or citizens become guests and the refugees are hosts. And I think that this time around, I recognize that there's another switch that's really surprising and really counterintuitive, which is it seems to me that the private spaces, especially when you talked about civic engagement in private spaces, the private spaces become public spaces. And you got me wondering to what extent when we take scholarship that's mostly based on empirical observations of integration or incorporation in the global north, we assume certain things about private and public, that maybe we need to think about those assumptions when we bring them into global south spaces, or particularly in this place, because it just seems that this private space was also a public, or not public in the dichotomy sense, but more things were happening in terms of that might be analyzed otherwise in public spaces. So even the sentence that you had about even if you want to study marketing the foods and selling these things at a higher scale, especially as it relates to humanitarian agencies and people making food, essentially becoming entrepreneurs in one way, making money off food, you have to really understand this domestic space. I don't know, what do you think about this public-private divide, and to what extent do your ethnographic observations, right, because it's not just about interviews, it's the fact that you've done ethnographic work, inform how we might rethink civic engagement in these places?
So the question is about what is this blurring boundary between the public spaces and private spaces, as women are, their homes are actually working almost like a project-based camp, especially for these initiatives that came out of those gatherings. And that's a very good question. It is bugging me that as I write, I refer these spaces as private spaces, because I think that privacy this doesn't translate as the private space in the global north, because yes, the access is limited, like only boys to a certain age limit are allowed, and it's mostly for women, as they cook and they want to be out of their religious attire. But I think, how to say, the door is open. You don't need to make an appointment to visit someone's house. It was something they also encouraged me to do when I'm trying to schedule interviews or something. They were like, you don't need to call me. You know that I am up here from 11. It's my coffee time. You are welcome. Just hop on bus and show up here. And this is true for everyone, which actually makes interview making very difficult too, because I'm thinking I schedule a one-on-one interview, and then the neighbor comes, someone's grandma comes, kids come, and I'm like, I thought this is gonna be one-on-one, and they're like family, it doesn't matter. Oh, let's carry on. And then everyone comments, everyone answers my questions. So I think that is a bit of problematic. The private space isn't the home isn't the home that we imagine in the global north. Definitely those homes, they become a more open to public spaces, and you don't need an appointment to come. You don't need an official invite. You can just come with the dye in your hand. This happened. Walk in and say that I couldn't dye my hair. Can you help me? And then all of a sudden, it's also a hair salon.
Yeah, I just had a question. So one thing that you talk about these initiatives that are kind of been born out of this collective thinking, but you also mentioned early on something about integration that kind of intimated that perhaps one of these works is because it wasn't forced, it wasn't programming by some global institution or some institution from global north. And I'm just thinking about the role that this is a very particular geographic slice of shared culinary tradition, but many cultures around the world find that community in food. And so I'm just curious, if you have any thoughts about, at a broader scale, how food could be a bigger part of integration, but in a way that isn't this top-down forcing people to go into a kitchen together. And also, I know this is a story about women, but I'm also wondering about men and what this means for their integration.
Yeah, very good questions. So the question is, the last one is how men are part of this conversation, and the first one is that unofficial engagement makes these civil society projects, not even a project, but gatherings so intimate and successful, and how we can actually translate this to the more like structural institutional projects, right? So the first answer to this first one is, I think that in another chapter, I'm trying to kind of talk how like these kind of projects are not quantifiable, and the humanitarian organizations are only kind of focusing on quantifiable projects because they need to report donors and they need to show numbers to their donors. But what they can do on the side is actually like providing maybe a space, providing ingredients for free, and encouraging more people. Because in this case, it works for them. All groups, they want to make that cheese. They want to make that, I don't know, stock. So they come and like, can you help me? Because that's what we did in my village back there or in my city. And that's how they find each other. But I think organizations or state projects can definitely help people, like-minded people, to find each other. And I think food is a very good way of doing this because a lot of people enjoy cooking, or they enjoy eating, or they enjoy trying something new. And it is provide a bit of a relaxed kind of environment. And for men, unfortunately, with men, it was very hard to conduct interviews. They were very quick to shake me off. After one interview, they just didn't want to talk anymore. I think maybe another project could be like watching those coffee and tea places where specifically men gathered. Women are not included in those spaces. They're not welcomed in those spaces. And I have no idea what kind of bonding is happening. I know there is a food sharing and drinking tea or like smoking shisha, but those spaces aren't accessible for me. So I actually don't know the details. Did we?
60 seconds. The last point that you just made got me thinking, like, how interesting to pose to a room of folks, or demographers, is when there's a problem with measurements, like you can't measure, but you know something is valuable. How do you translate? And in this case, it's not just about methodology, but it's about like action and preparation. So I don't know exactly how to ask that, but just to throw it out there. Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks very so much. But yes, we're gonna meet, talk about carrying job and recommendations for gratitude.
Yeah, so please feel free if you want to have like conversations go on
So, there were like 19 people besides, organizing types listening online. So you had 19 plus all of these people. Good attendance.
So much like this is the first time I'm speaking in front of so many people. It was very good practice for me. Thank you.
Thank you for the technical
Oh,
support.
sure.
No, it's good. It's part of the practice because it's gonna happen now some time, more time.
I thought I had a similar experience in Thailand when I was doing field work at Refugee. I would arrange an interview underneath, because they have their houses are raised up above. You sit underneath the house, and it's cooler on a bench, and then everybody would try to ask what you thought were sensitive questions. Everybody would be like, well, no, that's not how.
I like sometimes I don't even understand what's the view of the main person I'm trying to, but I hear everyone
And it kind of raises the question, about when you say to the institution, that's here, I'm gonna go do this field work. And you're gonna interview somebody, like, you thought you were gonna interview them alone, but actually it's not private. Yeah.
Also, because of the people in the policy, you know? Yeah. And like sometimes I'm trying to read I didn't have a written paper, but the oral, and so I need to read that piece of like one paragraph, and they don't listen. They're like, oh, I thought they're talking to you. I'll help you. Listen. What do you want to know? Ask me.
Hi, congratulations! I'm following your presentations through Zoom. I was working though. Yeah, I'm Lisa. I'm from GIS. Yeah, I did the same research, but in among some refugee in Seattle.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so maybe you could.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I would love that. Shall we exchange like emails or phone numbers?
sure.
I can.
That's really good.
Thanks so much. It's a work in progress, but I'm happy.
Is this part of your dissertations? Like
Yeah,
a one
one to
chapter?
thing, and
Oh,
I
yeah.
started writing it this
Yeah.
month.
How is it now?
I don't know because I didn't focus much on writing. I'm working on it.
Yeah, but that's
Hopefully it
really
will come
good. Yeah.
together. Maybe you can put your email
Okay.
address and I will email you. You are doing a PhD?
This is my second master.
Ooh.
actually. And then I'm thinking about this
UW.
UW. Yeah.
Hmm.
I'm thinking about going to PhD, but maybe not here.
Hmm.
Yeah, because my husband right now in California,
Hmm.
Daily. So
I see.
yeah, I'm gonna transfer.
Yeah, it's hard to do long distance.
I know I've been doing it for 1 year, and then I don't think I couldn't do it more. So yeah.
Okay, I'm writing. This is Ida. Let's meet for coffee, and we can maybe.
Yeah, and I also do. And then
Okay, and let's compare our findings. Definitely, I would love to like work
So,
together.
Rawan told me about your research yesterday. We met at the event, and then she sent me the link. Yeah.
Great, Raman is amazing, connecting people.
Yeah. Congratulations again.
Thank you.
Yeah. How far it goes? Your dissertation, your research.
So many years. I'm embarrassed to say it's my
Oh,
ninth
John
year.
B.
I'm blaming the pandemic and other like some personal stuff in my family,
Yeah,
but
that's okay.
anyway, I'm doing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Inshallah, I will finish by the end of this year.
Yeah. It's tough year, but yeah, you get there. Yeah.
Okay, then I'm waiting for your email to meet for coffee next week
Okay,
to talk a bit more in
sure.
depth about the
Yeah.
projects.
Yeah, yeah.
So nice to meet you.
Nice to
Thank
meet you too.
One of my students yesterday, I told my friend about this process. They wanted to come on Tuesday. Well, your